What's going on, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. That's Mark Wang, and we are here for another episode. We got a loaded episode for you guys today, coming at you with our preview podcast. We do these every week ahead of Oregon's game on Saturday. And then today we have Oregon versus BYU. That's the big game that we're going to be hitting on. And before we get into today's show, we got some people showing up here in the comments. We got Gerard, we got Eric, two very prominent supporters of the show. So if you guys have a question or a comment, definitely head on over to the live chat. Let us know what's on your mind. Float some questions our way, and we will see what we can get to. But we already have, a list of topics that we want to get into today to hit on to kind of give you a good sense of where Oregon's at and what kind of opponent they should be expecting when the number 12 BYU Cougars and Kalani Sitake come to Autzen Stadium. Mark, my guy, how are we doing? I feel like I was just in the press box with you at Autzen, and now we got another game on our hands.
Yep, everything's moving pretty quick. I'm doing pretty good. Real excited to be talking Ducks, and very excited to be getting back up into the press box in a couple days.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, we got a show to get to, Mark. So what do you say? How about we hop right into it? Just a couple of, quick notes ahead of this game. The last I checked right before that we hopped on here, the Ducks are 4-point favorites on SI Sportsbook. So, that's usually the outlet that we use being, over at Ducks Digest to write our stories. Over under set at 58. But what do we kind of think about those numbers, Mark? I feel like I'm a little surprised that Oregon opened as the favorite, just seeing the caliber of opponent that BYU played last week and, how close of a game that was. But I think I'm right on par with them as far as the bettors thinking that this is going to be a close one.
I agree. This is definitely going to be a close one. I'm also a little bit surprised that Oregon is the favorite there, just because of the fact that it's like you've had two games for the Ducks on both opposite ends of the spectrums. You get whipped by Georgia, and then you whip Eastern Washington, and then you got BYU that took the number 12 at the time ranked Baylor Bears and took them to double overtime and won. So this is going to be a very good game. I think it is going to be a close game, but I am definitely surprised that BYU is not favored in this game, even if just by a little bit.
And then we got the over/under set at 58 points. I think that speaks, about the two solid offenses that we have coming into this one. We're obviously going to talk a lot more about BYU and Oregon here. But BYU comes with a good quarterback, some proven running backs, lots of talented options at wide receiver, even though they didn't have Gunnar Romney or Puka Nacua, their two top wideouts last week against Baylor. We'll talk a little bit more about the latest on those guys and kind of how we think they factor into this one. But I think it should be a good matchup. And I think this is a game that is going to kind of give us a better feel about where Oregon's at, which kind of leads me into our first topic. What is Oregon's identity right now heading into this game against the BYU Cougars?
I think they're still trying to figure that out. I think they're trying to figure out really what they've got with Bo Nix, really who they've got to be maybe that star running back, or if they are going to continue with this running back by committee style of play that we've seen the past couple of games. So I think Oregon's still trying to really figure that out. I think everyone's going to be waiting to see kind of what they come out with. Are they going to come out with more run heavy, or is it going to be much more kind of a pass happy offense? Because we've heard Dan Lanning say that the Ducks are looking to create a lot more explosive plays. He said he wants to turn those plays of 15 yards into plays of 30 yards. So we'll see if that's coming more in the style of the run or in the style of the pass. I think that everyone's going to be wanting to see the pass, but we'll see what happens come Saturday.
Yeah, and I think that Oregon, even though they are kind of undergoing a little bit of an identity change with this new coaching staff, new coordinators on both sides of the ball, I feel like they're going to be a run-first team. I know that Dillingham's talked about wanting to have a balanced attack, get guys in one-on-one matchups. But if the run's working, I feel like that's definitely going to be something that you want to lean on, especially since you don't necessarily know what you're going to get out of your quarterback on a game-to-game, week-to-week basis. We're going to talk more about Bo Nix later in the show. But I was watching some of that Baylor BYU game, Mark, and Baylor was able to run the ball, relatively easily against BYU in that defensive front. I'm not saying it's a bad or a weak defensive front, but I bring that up to say that Baylor was able to really pound the rock against BYU, and I think that's going to go a long way in just helping this Oregon offense get into a rhythm. We saw Bucky Irving kind of emerge as the lead back or the feature back in terms of the number of carries. But dude, that Oregon backfield looks really, really promising. You got guys that can contribute from top to bottom. Byron Cardwell scored rushing and receiving touchdowns last week. Sean Dollars looks awesome after missing all of last season with an injury. I remember that Byron Cardwell in spring ball said that you couldn't tell that Sean had gotten hurt at any point, and he looks great. And then you have Noah Whittington, who comes in and scores a touchdown as well. You even had Kilo Hassenritter, Kilo from Hilo, getting his first college touchdown after transferring over from Hawaii. We didn't see any of Jordan James, the freshman out of the state of Tennessee from the 2022 recruiting class. He led the team in carries against Georgia, but a little hard to take too much from that because it was such a blowout game. But I say all that. I think that it's like you're saying, it is still a work in progress what Oregon's identity is right now, because they've had those two extremes. You test yourself with the best of the best, with the defending national champions on the road in Atlanta, or neutral site if you want to call it that, but we all know it wasn't. And then you have Eastern Washington, which usually has been pretty highly regarded as an FCS team, but I wasn't expecting it to be that much of a blowout. So from my end of things, it's a little bit hard to tell, is that more good Oregon, or is Eastern Washington maybe not what they were cracked up to be after, a narrow win over Tennessee State the week prior?
Yeah, I think Oregon definitely is still, going through that identity crisis. And just for Oregon, you can't really judge this team off of just those two like you said, off those two extremes. You get whacked, and then you hit back the next week. And I also agree with you. I wasn't expecting that game to be that bad. I thought Oregon was going to win that game. I didn't think it was going to be that bad, though, or that it would take that long for Eastern Washington to score. And yeah, Oregon's running back room, like you said, looked great. We saw last week a lot of the guys get those reps, and a lot of guys get a lot of carries. I think two guys got 9. I think 3 got 8. A couple got 7 as well. So you had a lot of diversity amongst the running backs, and I think that could, if Oregon's looking to go more run heavy this week, I think that's something that they could use to their advantage, be able to kind of mix it up, keep that BYU defense on their toes, and try and keep the guys as fresh as they can be, so that they can be able to contribute longer in the game and down the season.
Yeah, it just helps you too. You have that raw numbers advantage of just being able to have fresh bodies. It seems like Lanny's been asked about the whole running back by committee approach, and it's still a work in progress. And he was kind of saying, if we have guys that we think can contribute, we're going to find ways to get them involved. So yeah, it was a really solid effort. 263 rushing yards against Eastern Washington. And then on a similar note, in the passing game, Oregon's looking like they're, set up to be a much more effective passing team from last year. You have Eric here right on point talking about Terence Ferguson, one of our offensive players of the game last week. Only had 3 catches, Mark, but he had 2 touchdowns, and one of them was, bobbling the ball after the Eastern Washington defender, had it hit off of his hands, and then he barreled over a couple guys en route to a touchdown. And then Cam McCormick got his first touchdown since forever, wearing Spencer Webb's 18 in his first game back at Autzen after battling injury for quite some time. So I think you see the running game looking promising, the tight ends looking to get more involved. Troy Franklin having a heck of a game with 10 catches for 84 yards and a touchdown. So it just feels like they have a lot of promising options, regardless of what position you're looking at, to really have guys step up and make an impact. And then if you can get guys, blow these games wide open, like they did against Eastern, then you can see some of those younger guys like Ty Thompson, Jay Butterfield coming in. Kyler Casper got some snaps. Josh Connerly got some snaps. So I think that would really help this team if they are able to kind of blow things open against BYU. But this is really their last big test before things get going in conference play as a non-conference slate comes to an end here.
Yeah, I don't think that this game's going to get blown quite as wide open as that Eastern Washington game. But I think definitely if towards the end and Oregon has a comfortable lead, maybe they can bring in some more of those guys to try and get that experience. But I think definitely that depth is going to be something that that Dillingham and Lanning are going to really rely on in this for this offense to really try and get something going.
We've talked a lot about the offense. Let's just talk about the defensive identity a little bit right now, Mark. No turnovers against Georgia, almost no positives that you can really draw from that game from a defensive standpoint. They talked about the perimeter, just getting absolutely destroyed on the perimeter on both sides of the ball. Open field tackling was a huge issue. Lanning's talking about open field is kind of where they're getting exposed as a defense right now. But they have a lot of depth at the interior defensive line, even after losing Popo Amavai to a season-ending foot injury that required surgery. So I think that they still have that ability to be, a tough, hard-nosed defense in the trenches, but they haven't proven that they can get after the quarterback on a consistent basis. Again, I think part of that comes with the two extremes that they've played so far this season. But they've also played two teams that get the ball out pretty quickly. And Dan Lanning was asked about the pass rush, and he was saying that I don't really care how many sacks we get. I care about how many wins we get. And then when we have the opportunity for sacks, we got to be able to finish those plays and take advantage of those opportunities. And I would tend to agree because that finishing plays has definitely been an area that Oregon struggled for quite a while.
Absolutely. Looking at both those games, the Georgia game and the Eastern Washington game, there was a lot of problems. There was a lot of problems tackling, a lot of high tackling, a lot of arm tackling. And that's not how you get somebody down in football. You gotta tackle low. They always tell you that. I hear that all the time from Bob Warner on up to pros. Tackle low. Don't try and get the guy up top. Get him down low. And that is something absolutely that Oregon's going to need to do. Jaron Hall, the BYU quarterback, he's coming in after that big one. He's going to be confident. And Oregon just needs to be able to Oregon, I think, is just going to need to be able to rattle him. Hall was sacked twice last week against from Baylor, and I think Oregon's going to need to chase after him, get him uncomfortable, and just be more aggressive overall. Because we haven't seen a lot of sacks really at all, if any, I think, from this Oregon team so far. And especially as you're getting in towards conference play, you've got to be able to get after the quarterback to potentially help swing momentum in a big game. And this is certainly a game where that could come into play.
Yeah, they were able to get a pair of sacks, I believe, in week 2 against Eastern Washington. But, like we said, a hard game to assess too much from. But they did get 2 takeaways. Triquez Bridges almost returned it for a touchdown, and before he fumbled it right before the end zone. So there you have it, just kind of where Oregon's identity is at right now heading into this game. Our next topic on the docket, Mark, what's on the line in number 25 Oregon versus number 12 BYU? This is definitely one of the best non-conference games across the country in college football. I think for this one, just to take the BYU angle to switch things up a little bit, they're getting ready to head to the Big 12, in the near future here. They were undefeated against the Pac-12 last year, but the best team that they beat was definitely Utah, the defending Pac-12 champions. But now they get a shot at one of the bigger dogs, one of the bigger names in the Pac-12 with Oregon. So especially after signing Kalani Sitake to a contract extension, I think that this is a prove-it game for them to show that they can show up and play in those big venues. They've played all across the country, USC, Tennessee. So Autzon's definitely a home crowd advantage and one of the toughest places to play in the country. And with that, the 20-game home win streak, I'm not saying it's definitely in jeopardy, but that's another thing that's on the line in this game.
Oh, it's definitely, you absolutely could say that it could potentially be in jeopardy because this is a BYU team that's absolutely no slouch. This is a BYU team that is coming to play. They are absolutely looking to prove that they belong. I know I've been hearing talk of being like, oh, could BYU make the college football playoff? Number one, I don't think so. Number two, I think it's way too early to start having that kind of talk yet. But I know BYU is definitely looking, or actually, both teams I think really are looking for that for respect nationally. I think BYU is looking to say it's like, hey, we're a good team. We are somebody who can play with the big dogs, put some respect on our names. And I think Oregon is saying it's like, look, we just had two extremes. We beat up on an FCS team. We got beat by the national champs, but we are still a very good team, and we can still show that we can be a top team in this country.
Yeah. And I think also for BYU, Mark, I don't know if you've looked at their schedule, but that is a rough schedule. Obviously playing against Baylor last week, that was a crazy game. Then you got Notre Dame in Las Vegas in early October. Then you welcome Arkansas, you play against Liberty, Boise State, and then you wrap up the regular season with Stanford. So they have a lot of tests on their schedule. And I think that kind of like you were saying, they want to show that they don't, they play big time football, even though they're an independent as of right now. But you look across their roster, man, they got some 300 pound plus linemen on both sides of the ball. So I don't think that they really resemble your typical independent team. So I think that both of these teams are looking for some respect. I was on Ryan Winter's show yesterday, Sports Chat 503. We got a lot of common fans in our audiences that love the Ducks. And we were talking about, I just totally had a brain fart. Give me a second here. About how, it doesn't help you to schedule these cupcake teams. I think that with the state of the Pac-12 and where Oregon's at with their image nationally, you want to be tested by the best teams in the country. And I'm not saying that BYU's one of the best teams in the country. I mean, they're ranked 12th. They're certainly one of the best teams in the Western region. So I think that both of these teams are fighting for some respect. And I think for Oregon, this would almost seem like the first real win under Dan Lanning, because like we said, 70-14, not a whole lot that you can take from that one. So I feel like this would be a statement win for either team. But in a way, BYU's already gotten that when they took down Baylor last week. Oregon, they're still looking for that big signature win under Dan Lanning to start the year.
Absolutely, yeah. You need that big win to really solidify that start of the season for any new head coaching staff. And like you said, Max, for BYU, yeah, this schedule is tough. Yeah, you played number 9 Baylor next week. You come to Oregon this week. You have Notre Dame, Arkansas, Boise State, and then to top off the year, you got Stanford. So that's definitely not a cupcake schedule. And I think BYU, yeah, they did have that signature win against Baylor, and they're going to be looking to build on that. I think they're well aware of the fact that people are like, oh, beat some more good teams, then we can talk about maybe making the college football playoff. And then for Oregon, it's like, well, we're still looking, for that signature win for Dan Lanning, but also we're looking for the respect that they think that they deserve as the major Pac-12 team, or as basically the major last standing Pac-12 team, with SC and UCLA going to the Big Ten next year.
Yeah, and another point here, Mark, I think this is going to really tell us where Oregon can go in their season, because I think that you could put BYU, in the upper third of the Pac-12 if you were to just plop them in this conference. I think, USC, Utah, Oregon, Washington State, Oregon State are some of the top teams right now through 2 weeks. But I think that BYU, you can make the argument that they're significantly better than most Pac-12 teams. And then what does Oregon have to do after they face BYU? They have to hit the road, go to the Palouse, and face Cameron Ward and the Washington State Cougars, who just knocked off a ranked Wisconsin team on the road at Camp Randall in Madison. So I think this is a great time for this game to come. It's definitely a test Oregon needs. And I think that if Dan Lanning can get the Ducks, to win this game, it's going to show that, hey, my team can hang around in these big games, because that was one of the biggest storylines around that hiring, Mark, is that Oregon feels like they're in their championship window right now. But when you have to go through another coaching transition, it's just hard to get that consistency. But I feel like, and you guys can comment in the chat here, I feel like the expectation is at the very least a Pac-12 title, and then Rose Bowls aren't enough. You're trying to make back to that playoff conversation.
Yeah, I think they are definitely in win now mode. I think getting Dan Lanning was for that win now. I mean, if you're Dan Lanning, you just came off winning a national championship at Georgia, where you were the defensive coordinator, and now you're coming into to build up another program that was already, I think, talent-wise in a very good spot, because Cristobal was is a very good recruiter, as is Lanning. So talent-wise, yeah, you're in a very good spot, but also, yeah, you need to. I think a lot of Oregon fans are saying it's like, oh, they can get to the Natty right now. Oh, they just got to do this, this, and this. It's like, that's not as easy as it sounds. And I do think that, especially for hiring a coach like Dan Lanning, the expectation is, at the very least, I think making the Pac-12 title game. I think winning that Pac-12 title game and going back to the Rose Bowl would be awesome. But I'm not really sure. I think once we see what Oregon's identity really is and how everyone really gels together, I think then we can kind of start talking more about that. But I think as of right now, we don't know. But I think that this BYU game could really be kind of like the prove-it game for really both these teams.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing eye to eye on that. Just to give some final thoughts here, I feel like some of the expectations for Oregon fans too are to beat Washington. You get the Huskies at home in Kalen DeBoer's first year. They kind of have a prove-it game of their own this week against the Michigan State Spartans, who come to Seattle. Michael Penix's going to face a Big Ten team after coming over from Indiana. So we're going to kind of get a good feel for where that Washington team is at as well. An offense that has struggled in recent years, and they've definitely hung their hat on their defense. But Kalen DeBoer is an offensive mind, one of the better offensive minds out west. So kind of same deal there. So I think that there's a pretty significant amount on the line here for Oregon and BYU, especially when you think of college football. There's only so many games. You only play it once a week. So you really got to make the most of your opportunity and on the field. Looks like you had something you wanted to add there, Mark.
Yeah, and one other thing is, if I'm not mistaken, Oregon's also playing Utah at Autzen this year, which is going to be another enormous game.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And they recruit the state of Utah pretty heavily.
Yep.
I saw someone comment that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, Oregon really gets the two big Utah teams. They get BYU this week. They get Utah later down the line. Utah being basically the class of the Pac-12 after beating Oregon twice last year, pretty badly too, both times.
Yeah, so the Ducks are fighting for some respect in the state of Utah. I don't know what their I want to say it's the Beehive State. I don't know what their state nickname is. But someone else can find that and throw it in the chat if they want. But next topic we want to get to before we get to a break here. One of the biggest questions for Oregon going against BYU this week at Autzen Stadium: which Bo Nix will Oregon get against the Cougars? I think a lot of people, after seeing his Oregon debut against Georgia, particularly those in SEC country, were not super surprised. Bo Nix had struggled against Georgia in the 3 previous matchups, and that was again the case, throwing 2 interceptions against Georgia. And, I'm not sure that those were, game breakers, because the offense was just struggling overall. But when you're going up against a team that's that good, your margin for error is so small. And Oregon was able to move the ball relatively well, kind of here and there throughout the game, but they weren't able to finish drives. Dan Lanning talked about how that was a big issue. So you have that version of Bo Nix throwing 2 picks in the first game. Then he, comes against Eastern Washington and has a really, really good game, has as many incompletions as he does touchdowns. Throws for 5 touchdowns, the first Duck to do that since Justin Herbert, 277 yards, and he didn't even play the whole game. Looked a little bit much more composed and comfortable. But we'll see if the BYU defense lets him get settled in. What do you think about this topic? I feel like it's going to go a long way in determining where this game ultimately shakes out.
It's going to, absolutely. I think when you look at both the Eastern Washington game and the Georgia game, Bo Nix and the Oregon offense, they did move the ball around decently well, but yeah, those interceptions were drive killers, and I do ultimately think that those were game killers because Oregon had a chance on that first drive. Like they're going down the field, they're marching well, and they're getting real close to the red zone. Bo Nix throws an interception. A little later, you're driving well, moving the ball. Bo Nix throws an interception. Defenses, especially good defenses, and I think BYU, you can say they have a good defense because you take down another highly ranked team in Baylor. So I think if you're playing against a really good team, you can't afford to have those interceptions. And I think it's gonna come down to, can Oregon, as Dan Lanning says, do simple better? That was something that I remember him saying at the presser after the Eastern Washington game is we did simple better against Eastern Washington. So really getting back to those fundamentals is like the fundamentals. They're not the most exciting thing, as we all know, but they're the thing that can end up saving your skin in a football game later down the line. So I think it just depends on how Bo Nix comes out of the gate. Can he do the simple things well, get the ball moving, build that momentum for Oregon to build on, and then get into the end zone. But I do think, if he starts going out there being kind of reckless and throwing like an interception or two, number one, that's not going to do very much good for your confidence. Number two, Oregon's going to probably lose the game if that happens. And number three, you're going to have all of Austin Stadium calling for Ty Thompson to come into the game.
Yeah, and I mean we did get to see Ty Thompson last week, and we talked in our post game show earlier this week, or our final thoughts rather. Man, Austin was just roaring when Ty Thompson came into that game, which was pretty cool to see. I mean, especially because the game was out of hand, and that made sense. It was the smart move by the staff.
I was really surprised it got that loud, though.
Yeah, no,
we were both there. We heard how loud it got. I remember I was like, "Whoa, I was not expecting that."
Yeah, man. I mean, when you have a quarterback that before Dante Moore committed, he was the highest rated quarterback commit in program history. Excuse me, got to catch myself for a program podcast. People want to see him play, and Oregon played in so many close games last year, and then when they were getting blown out, the previous staff wouldn't put him in. So I think a lot of people want to draw a lot of storylines from that. But to get back to Bo, I think that you just don't put it in the situation where you need to have Bo win the game for you. I'm not saying he's not capable of that. We know how much playmaking ability he has, but I think from an Oregon perspective, I think you'd rather, get the ball moving on the ground. That's why I said earlier in the show that was such a key for them. If they can get that run game going, it'll really open up, I think, some different elements in the passing game. Keep getting that chemistry with Troy Franklin and Dante Thornton. Get Chase Cota involved. You got some huge tight ends that are going to be a threat for you, I think, in this game. So I think it's, a combination, Mark. Do the simple things better, but also take some downfield shots, but make them like calculated risk, or, put it in a spot where only your guy can get it. Don't be setting yourself up for failure if you're having some ugly throws out there. As my dad would say, some wobblers. When we played catch when I was growing up, it was definitely some wobblers for my dad. So you want to have that ball coming out crisp and make some good reads. Don't stare down your primary read too much. I think that's one thing, a big criticism that people have had of Bo Nix so far this season. So do the simple better. Take what the defense gives you, and just put together some drives and finish some drives. And if that defense can get some takeaways, you got to put it on yourself as a quarterback, as an offense. Hey, they got a takeaway for us. Now it's on us to finish it and put some points up on the board on the other end of the field.
Absolutely, yeah. Like Bo Nix, we've seen him be able to make those big plays. We've seen him be able to lead a big drive down the field. I mean, heck, Oregon fans, saw him do that against Oregon in his first start. Oregon had that lead, and then Auburn was able to drive down the field and basically win that game. Yeah, pretty much at the last minute. I remember watching that game. That hurt definitely, but yeah, Bo has to step up as the QB. I think he knows that. He knows what the expectation is, and I think he also knows the talk that's been happening about him and Ty Thompson. I think this is honestly a game where he can really silence the critics and say it's like, hey, I had a rough start game one. I could have you could say that I maybe stat padded a little in the game two. This is the game where Bo Nix really steps up, I think.
Yeah, and in that rough debut, it was against probably a top 3, top 4 defense in the country. So it's like you can't knock a guy too much for that. But to go to your point, I think this is a game where he can, show why this Oregon staff wanted him. Flash some of that playmaking ability, show that he has been a 3-year starter in the SEC, and that he should be prepared for, big matchups like this. So I think that this is definitely a prove-it game for Bo Nix, and one that he can use to kind of propel himself in the right direction and get some good positive momentum and confidence heading into that Wazoo matchup to open Pac-12 play.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you play in probably the best conference in football, that does prepare you. And kind of speaking to Georgia, that's not a top 3 defense. I think that's a top 1 defense because Alabama showed maybe not the top defense after almost losing to Texas by 1 point.
Yeah, I think Alabama got a little bit exposed last week. That was definitely a really fun one to watch. Wonder what it would have looked like if Quinn Ewers didn't get banged up in that one. We're going to take a quick break here on the Ducks Dish podcast, and then we're going to take more of an in-depth look at BYU and kind of some of the weapons that they have on both sides of the ball. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Ducks Dish podcast. We've got more Duck football talk for you after this. All right, welcome back to the Ducks Dish podcast. I'm your host, Max Torres. That's my guy, Mark Wang, and we are breaking down Oregon versus BYU in our Ducks Dish preview podcast. And the next big question that we're going to hit on today, can Oregon contain BYU quarterback Jaren Hall? We've seen a lot of you guys in the chat. You've been incredibly active. Appreciate the engagement there. Kind of getting a good feel for where you guys are at, what you guys are interested in ahead of this matchup. And it's gonna be a huge key for Oregon, right? I think that's where the the offense starts for BYU, and I think this is the best overall quarterback that Oregon has faced so far this season. I think that Stetson Bennett has definitely proven a lot of doubters wrong, and is definitely in the conversation as one of the better quarterbacks in the country. I think a lot of people are gonna kind of slight him for the immense amount of skill talent that Georgia has. But he's shown why he's a veteran quarterback, and I think that I wouldn't be surprised if he's in the Heisman race, later this season, because he's playing really well and Georgia is going to be that good of a team. But let's bring it back to Jaren Hall. I think he's a really versatile guy, can really hurt you with his arm or his legs. Definitely takes more deep shots than we saw last week against Eastern Washington from Gunnar Talkington. And with that, I think Oregon has a little bit more of an opportunity to step up in their pass rush and really try to get him to the ground. But DJ Johnson was talking earlier this week how it's kind of a little bit of an extra challenge going up against a guy like Jaren Hall, who can really hurt you with his legs, because just because you beat a tackle doesn't mean that the play is over. You still got to get that guy to the ground. What are some of your early thoughts here, Mark, on Oregon facing off against Jaren Hall?
Yeah, he's definitely the most versatile quarterback that Oregon has faced so far. I mean, Stetson Bennett, no scrub there. He's a national championship quarterback. But I can see why people, or I can see, to your point, why people would say it's like, oh, he's just that good because of all that talent that's on the Georgia team. I disagree. I think he is a really, really good He is a really good quarterback. That also just happens to have a lot of help. And I do think, yeah, he will be in the Heisman conversation. I think if he's not, that is disrespectful to him, especially if he continues to have a good season like he has been. But that's a discussion for another time. Jaren Hall, at least from looking at the stats from this Baylor BYU game, he's a real solid guy. Hurts you with the legs. Averages 2.8 yards for rushing with a long of 13. I'm not and in total got netted 28 yards rushing, gained 41, lost 13 for that total of 28. And then passing wise, 23 of 39 for one touchdown, no interceptions, and a long of 37. So he's a guy that can hurt you with the deep ball, hurt you with his legs too. And Oregon has to get him on the ground. I think definitely what we've seen so far this season from the Ducks, both in that Georgia game and that Eastern Washington game, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, is this is a team that hasn't really been tackling very well, or at least when they have been tackling, it's been a lot of upper body tackles, it's been a lot of arm tackles, and when you're playing against good teams, and we saw this in the Georgia game, when you play against a good team and you're not tackling well, they're going to run all over you. I mean, heck, there was at least one play. There was that one tackle in the Georgia game that basically got turned into a meme pretty much because it was such a bad tackle.
Are you talking about Darnell Washington?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah. So they're gonna have to sharpen that up without a doubt. And I think that another big takeaway for me after watching Jaren Hall against Baylor, they're going to stretch the field, man. And Dan Lanning talked about that they're one of the better teams that's going to test you vertically. Because Jaren Hall had some really impressive throws into some tight windows against the Baylor Bears. And that's no slouch of a defense. Dave Aranda is one of the better defensive minds in college football. I think he's established himself as that. And BYU was even without some of their top receivers, who we're going to talk about here pretty soon. And Jaren Hall had no problem, distributing the rock. Keanu Hill, Chase Roberts had some really nice grabs, on the sideline, a couple toe taps. So Jaren Hall is a guy who he relies on his legs too much at times, that he had a couple that he tried to throw away that, were ultimately ruled as sacks against Baylor last week. But he can definitely, escape if they, break. He can definitely break contain with some of these edge guys if Oregon isn't careful. And another thing with Jaren Hall, just to comment on his versatility, Mark, they had a double pass in that game, and Jaren Hall had a receiving touchdown. He got the ball on the right side of the field, and then he just had a convoy of Cougars. That's some cool alliteration. Led by Kingsley Suamataia, the former 5-star Oregon offensive lineman, leading the way for him into the end zone. So I think that he's just really athletic. He's not an easy guy to bring down. He's good at keeping his eyes down the field. That's something that Dan Lanning talked about. I think that's where these dual threat guys can really hurt you, is because you think that they're committed to the run one moment, and then they're still behind the line of scrimmage, and they're able to, hit you with a deep shot down the field. So I feel like this will be the best test for Oregon's front seven from a quarterback standpoint, making sure that they're disciplined, not over pursuing. And then, like Dan Lanning talked about earlier this week, when you have those sack situations, when they're able to capitalize, get that guy on the ground and get some hits on him early. I think that's going to be really important too for this Oregon front seven. Even if you're not getting sacks, you just got to get some hits on that guy to let him know, send that message. It's not going to be easy, and we're going to be here all day. So for Oregon's sake, they're definitely hoping they can be regulars in the backfield this week.
Yeah, they need to get after Jaren. They need to get after Jaren Hall, show some aggressiveness, and be able to send that message clear. And also, I think for Oregon, it's like this is a game that the secondary is going to need to step up. You see the comment from Dennis Hill from Dennis here. That secondary is going to need to secondary is going to need to step up big in order to make life difficult for Hall down the field if they can lock down some of those wide receivers for BYU. But also, the front seven's just got to get in Hall's face. They have to be able to capitalize on those opportunities, and they have to finish the plays, because if they don't finish the plays, it's going to be a long day.
Yeah. Any final thoughts here on Jaren Hall before we go to our next topic here?
All I can say is just Oregon's got to be ready for him, plain and simple. is BYU like known as like the national powerhouse that Oregon has been traditionally? Maybe not, but that means you can't. Don't disrespect that. Don't disrespect the quarterback like that, and just be like, oh, we'll be fine. We'll be fine. For Oregon to say it's like, oh, we'll be fine. We're at home. It's not always the case. Not always the case. I think teams have shown in the past is like, if you disrespect them like that, they'll show up and give you a beat down. I don't think this game's going to be a total beat down, but I think Oregon has to be on their toes.
All right, our next topic on the show, we're going to talk about the secondary. One of the big questions for BYU and then this Oregon defense as we're heading into this matchup, will Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney play versus Oregon? I think this is one of the biggest questions right now, seeing that they didn't play last week. So that's going to be pretty big for just BYU to see what they can do from an offensive standpoint. But their passing attack didn't slow down after not having both of these guys available against Baylor. To get people up to speed, Puka Nacua had an ankle injury in the opener against South Florida, and we actually did hear from the passing game coordinator Fesi Sataki. He was talking about both of these guys, both of them being Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney, saying that they're a game time deal. Both receivers have been practicing and doing individual drills. Also, some additional context here, some background information that I think is worth noting. Romney's injury is, quote, a non-football injury. And then Aaron Roderick, the offensive coordinator, on Monday said that he's ready to go, just waiting for clearance. So I think that it's probably more so looking like they're going to play this week for BYU. And that's going to be a big test for the Oregon secondary, because I don't think they were really tested against Eastern Washington from a pass defense perspective. And then, like I said earlier in the show, BYU had a lot of other guys that showed up really early and made an impact. Chase Roberts, a true freshman, 8 catches for 122 yards and a touchdown. Keanu Hill, Cody Epps. BYU has weapons, and Oregon's secondary is going to have to be ready to defend them. I think you get a little bit more confidence in Christian Gonzalez as your CB1, and then Triquez Bridges both of those guys get interceptions. But I think that you just want to see more than any other group maybe on that defense. You want to see the secondary playing with a load of confidence. You want to see them being physical. You want to see them, not having any mental lapses. But I think that the secondary is going to be a huge role, much more so this week against BYU than last week against Eastern Washington.
If Nakua's a game time decision and he didn't play last week, I would be very surprised if he doesn't play this week. Football players, they have that dog in them. They want to go out. They want to compete, and I'm almost certain if he knows that this is a big game. Sorry, lost my train of thought there. He knows this is a big game. He knows that BYU is looking for that respect. He's going to go out there and play. Romney, as long as he gets that clearance, he plays too. And yeah, the Oregon secondary we've seen this year has been definitely a bit of a sore spot really the entire year. Like against Georgia, they got straight exposed against Georgia. Stetson Bennett just went crazy. And even against Eastern Washington, Eastern Washington was able to get quite a few deep balls back behind that defense. And granted, Oregon defense was able to step up later and shut down the drives, given that Eastern Washington only scored 14 points. But still, if you're a defense and you're in that kind of a blowout, you can't be taking your foot off the gas to be like, oh, it's okay, we can let them score a little bit. Giving a football team even one play really to get their confidence back can be huge. And I think in Oregon's case this week, they can't let BYU get that confidence going. Otherwise, they're going to be in really for a tough game.
Yeah, and I think that Oregon's secondary has kind of been a question mark for me dating back to spring ball. Looking at the spring game tape, I don't think that anybody was overly impressive in that game. But they do have some decent depth there, particularly at the safety group. I think you're a little bit more experienced there. Jaleel Florence and Jaleel Tucker have been seeing some decent snaps. Florence more so, I think, in kind of quality game reps than Tucker, but he was there for spring ball, so I think that's to be expected. But Dante Manning, another guy that I think has a lot of expectations still in front of him. I think Brian Addis has been getting some more reps this year as one of the bigger, stronger safeties for Oregon. Excuse me, my throat's getting dry here. But Brian Addison's going to be, I think, a contributor for Oregon. Steve Stevens, Bennett Williams. I think the question just becomes, Mark, when can this Oregon secondary get to a consistent group and maybe not need to rotate as much? Because I think that there's a very fine line, or maybe a distinction is a better word, between, we have so many talented guys so we can rotate people in here and there, versus we're still trying to figure out what works here and we don't know quite the right combination just yet. And I'm not saying Oregon's in one or the other, but now that you're getting up to week 3, I think you want to feel a little more confident about which guys you can put out in which situation. I think to get a little bit more technical, I want to say they got both of their interceptions in the dime last week. So maybe you're feeling a little bit more comfortable rolling the dime package out there against BYU this week.
Yeah. If you're at this point, I think really, this would be the game for Oregon that you have to be able to really start solidifying that, because when you're heading into Pac-12 play, that's when you're hitting on all cylinders, playing your best football against your conference opponents. I think Oregon needs to. I think if there's any game really to be able to figure it out in, it's this game. You're playing a really good opponent, your last opponent before Pac-12 play. It's not the first week. You're now in the 3rd week of the season. I do think that that Oregon can start really figuring it out, or not, if not coming close enough to be able to, in this next week of practice, being able to really hammer out the fine details.
Yeah, and I think another significant point here that's worth mentioning that we've talked about a little bit, we've seen a lot of comments about it. I think that how the secondary looks is going to be dependent to a degree on the pass rush, because Oregon's pass rush has not been where it needs to be this season so far, but you have a lot of capable guys there. It almost feels like, I feel like with all their experience, maybe you want to see some more of that push coming from the interior that lets some of those middle guys or inside guys like, Flo, Sewell, Jeff Bossa, fly in there through the middle. But I know that DJ Johnson's someone that has a lot of expectations on his shoulders. Mace Funa, Braden Swinson. So we're just going to have to see if they can take a stride forward this year and this game in particular, and get some QB hurries at least, and capitalize on some of these sack opportunities. But if they're getting pressure on the quarterback, Mark, then that takes a lot of pressure off of the defensive backs, because they're not being asked to cover for such long periods of time. So I think it's a little early to judge any one group on this team. But I feel like we'll have a much better sample size once we get through this game. You have 3 weeks of tape that you can go back and evaluate on, whether that be in practice or in games. So I think we've had some fair criticism for kind of all 3 levels of the defense, and they're gonna need to try to just keep improving that continued measure of growth. But if Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney are available, I think that's a huge advantage for BYU. Getting a good boost to their offense. And, some more guys that Oregon's going to have to key in on their defensive game plan. And I think that they'd be wise to probably be doing that throughout the week. Figure that you got to, assume that they're going to be playing. And then, maybe you catch a break and they don't. But it looks like they're going to be this week.
Absolutely, yeah. Always assume that somebody's going to be playing unless it's already been ruled out. And then for Oregon, this is it. This is your last chance before Pac-12 play. If there's a time to step up, it's now.
All right. Our last topic that we want to hit on in today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast, we've talked a whole lot about Oregon's offense and defense and BYU's offense. We haven't really talked about the BYU defense. Let's examine the BYU defense and kind of what they present for Oregon. I think that one thing that really stands out that kind of I saw right away when I was doing some research for this episode, just looking at that front line, Mark, that defense, they don't look like your typical independent team. They've got a lot of guys that are, pushing that 300 mark, the 3 bills, as I like to say. and 4 guys were able to get sacks against Baylor, and that's a pretty solid offensive line. So, I talked a little bit about how Baylor was able to get what they wanted a little bit in the run game, but it seemed like they were a little bit susceptible to the BYU pass rush. I know for Oregon and their offensive line, we're still waiting to see if Ryan Walk and Stephen Jones are going to play. After Ryan Walk missed last week, and then Dan Lanning said on Wednesday, we'll see if Stephen Jones is available. But this BYU pass rush looks like it, could definitely give Oregon a little bit of issues here if they're not coming prepared to defend Bo.
Absolutely, yeah. That now is where that offensive line experience comes in. These guys been playing 3 seasons together. That's a solid offensive line. If they're not prepared for that rush, Bo's gonna get hit. Bo's gonna get rattled, and then that'll be a long day. That'll be a very long day for the Oregon Ducks out there at Autzen. Yeah, when you get four sacks against a good offensive line, that's always a good sign. And just they've had a good defense so far. Good defensive showing, at least from looking at the stats. Max Tooley, 13 tackles last week, 7 unassisted, 6 assisted. Ben Bywater, 11 sacks, 3 unassisted, 8 assisted. Also got one of those 4 sacks against Baylor, and then Amon Hanneman, 8 total tackles as well. So Oregon has to be prepared for an aggressive defense.
Yeah, and just to keep hitting on some names, you talked about Ben Bywater. He had a sack against Baylor, was the leading tackler for the Cougars in 2021. He's back this year. He looked great against Baylor. Had 8.5 tackles for loss to lead the team in 2021. And then staying on that defensive front, you got Caden Hawes, 6'2", 320-pound sophomore. John Nelson, 6'4", 275-pound sophomore. Then Tyler Batty is back, the sack leader from 2021. And then looking at that secondary, they have some guys that are pretty capable contributors as well. You have Malik Moore, who had the team leading 4 interceptions, I believe it was, from a year ago. And then a couple more guys that this is a group, Mark, that's capable of getting their hands on some of these passes. Both Jacob Robinson and D'Angelo Mandel had 4 pass breakups in 2021. So I feel like perhaps more than anything, BYU's got a lot of experience really on their side. And I think with that has to be some continuity, right? We talked about Kalani Sitake signing that extension, but that's another thing that they have that Oregon doesn't necessarily have. I don't think it's going to be a game breaker necessarily, but you and I both know how much it helps to have that continuity, both from a staff perspective and from a personnel perspective. And I think BYU's defense certainly checks both of those boxes.
It won't be a game breaker, but it will certainly help. And also another thing kind of about that BYU defense, Baylor got held to just 50% on third down conversions, 9 of 18 against the Cougs. Granted, BYU didn't do much better. They only got they had 3 of 14. But also on those fourth down conversions, Baylor going 1 for 2. So having that experience, having that continuity, and just having that aggression is going to be a key factor for BYU.
Yeah, and Mikey G is saying here that the tight ends need to be in the mix for this one. Could not agree more. And then Andrew saying here, T. Ferg can be a great safety valve for Bo Nix. So I think that BYU, their defense is probably a group that's fighting for some more respect in this one. And I think that they have the players to make it happen, whatever level of the defense you're looking at. But I think for this game, a lot of people want to be focusing on the physicality, and that really ultimately starts in the trenches. So, BYU's offensive line has been highly touted, and then Oregon's defensive line has some capable bodies there. And then, the respect goes both ways. BYU's defensive line is going to give Oregon a pretty good test, I think. So we'll have to see if those pieces are able to come back and play this week, talking about Ryan Walk, and then we'll see if Stephen Jones is available. And then Jackson Powers Johnson made his return last week and got some good reps, with some of the upper tier guys on this offensive line. So I think BYU's defense is definitely about as capable of a group that Oregon's going to face this season in Pac-12 play, and the Ducks got to be ready for them.
Absolutely. This is, I think, a good preview before Pac-12 play, before you go on the road for your first big road conference play of the year out on the Palouse.
Yeah, that's gonna be a fun game for sure. Let's see, we got about 5 minutes left. Maybe we can take a couple looks at these comments. Mark, what do you say?
Absolutely. Let's take a look.
All right, let's see. So, gonna try to get to some of these. Let's see. Mikey G says, I think we see good Bo if he's able to build confidence. Bad Bo seems to try to overcome mistakes by forcing big plays and backfiring. So let him flourish by giving him easier reads. Yeah, I think that is, some of the issues that you see kind of pop up. Playing hero ball is one way you could describe it. But I think that if they can get the offense rolling early, maybe the defense comes with a takeaway to get them some good field position. I think that could go a long way. And call in some of those easier plays. And we saw them do a lot of screens in that Georgia game, or some quick passes, quick to intermediate, short routes. So I think that that's definitely going to be a key for Oregon, is to get Bo that confidence early.
I agree. It's like what Lanning said, and like what I mentioned earlier in the show: do simple better. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't make Bo have to play hero ball. You can win that game.
Absolutely. Let's see. Andrew asks, wait, is Gus on the call?
Nope.
Because it's a Fox game. Gus Johnson's not on the call, which honestly I'm kind of happy about, because I feel like that dude does not like calling Oregon games. I remember that game against USC when maybe he wanted USC to win. He was just calling it super flat. But Gus Johnson's a GOAT for sure. I'm just saying, absolutely. I think that you can definitely see some of the national bias against Oregon when he calls those games. So just to give you guys a little programming update. The play-by-play is going to be Jason Benetti. Analyst is Brock Heward, and then the sideline reporter is Allison Williams. So that's some of our people that we got on the broadcast on Saturday.
And for Oregon fans, anybody who knows the name Brock Heward knows the pick.
Yeah, former Husky, right?
Yep.
All right, let's see what else we got here. Eric says Bo Nix needs to be our Geno Smith. Just keep it simple. I don't know if I would liken them.
Seahawks game this weekend.
Yeah, I don't know if I would liken them exactly at the same level, but a lot of people were counting Seattle out in that game, or even the whole season, because they traded Russell Wilson and don't have a lot of good options. But I think just keeping it simple is definitely going to go a long way, like we've talked about here. Let's see if there's anything else before we get out of here. Warren's asking about the weather forecast for Eugene. Let's see if we can figure that one out, unless he's already looked it up. It was a smoky day last weekend, but right now it's
looking out my window. It looks pretty nice. It looks pretty nice out right now. It doesn't look too doesn't really look too smoky. So I think we should be in the clear. Weather, from the looks of it, has been actually starting to cool down finally up here.
Yeah, so 65 and cloudy is the forecast for Saturday. Got a 12:35 kick for the Ducks at Autzen. Last one we're going to hit on here, Mark. Dennis says, I was just glad to see Ty get some actual game reps. That can only help his confidence if he gets his number called. Could not agree more with this. I think for as talented of a quarterback as he is, you're not going to get developed by standing on the sideline. So he's, and you can say that for any quarterback, right? It's so hard to see the field early as a quarterback in college football. There's only a handful of guys that, they get thrown into the fire and they just, flourish. You could call Justin Herbert one of those guys, but it was a 4-8 season. He got thrown in that 70-21 beatdown. So I don't know, but I think, I was encouraged to see Ty get some snaps. Hopefully Oregon can put some other games away this year so that he can continue to get some of those reps that he needs to, reach his full potential.
I agree with that. Getting those live reps is absolutely one of the most important things as a quarterback that you can get. And I agree. Hopefully if Oregon is able to put some of these games away, even against some of the lesser Pac-12 teams, you can get those, or he can get those reps further down the line. I don't know if he'll be the starter presumptive next year, or Bo Nix or Dante Moore, just because college football just has gotten, especially since COVID, college football got a whole heck of a lot more complicated.
Yeah, that it did. Just to give my final thoughts here, Mark, before we get out of here. Just to kind of summarize it, it's a prove it game for Oregon, no doubt about it. After having the 2 games that they've had, we'll get a much better test of where Oregon can ultimately land. This season, with BYU being I think much better than a majority of the Pac-12 teams. That said, the Pac-12 has had a pretty solid start to the year. Just from a record standpoint, not that they're going out and playing a bunch of amazing teams, but obviously Utah had that narrow loss at the Swamp. Really wish they would have been able to win that game just for the Pac-12. USC looks like they're showing some promise, off to a 2-0 start after getting that win over Stanford last week. I talked about that game against Fresno State coming up this weekend. I think they might be on upset alert just because Jake Haener is that guy. He's like my favorite West Coast quarterback to watch, you could say. So I think that we'll see a little bit more. We're going to learn a whole lot more about the Pac-12 this week. And just to give a quick shout out to my Pac-12 podcast, that is out now. My week 3 Pac-12 preview and picks. So go over to the Takeover Sports Network YouTube channel. I'll make sure to share that on my Twitter. But any final thoughts from you, Mark? Oh, can you hear me, Mark? I think you might be lagging a little bit.
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit there. Can you hear me?
Just any final thoughts? Yeah, I can hear you. Any final thoughts on this one?
Final thoughts, at least from me. I agree. This is a prove it game for Oregon. If I think it's going to be a rough go of the season the rest of the way if they lose this game and kind of get exposed. This is going to be a good game. This is going to be a close game, I think. So I'm very excited for this game. Maybe not excited for the early wake up call that morning, but other than that, that should be good. I'll just make sure to get extra coffee that morning.
Oh yeah, no, we were talking about slamming coffee in the press box, and I'm sure I'll be having some coffee of my own on Saturday. But if you guys want to find more, if you guys want to find more of Mark, you can follow him on Twitter at MarkW2016. He's also going to be rolling out more stories over on Ducks Digest, and he's going to be at the game along with our guy Graham Metzger. Scott Bull, our photographer, is going to be back in Eugene for that game at Autzen Stadium. Probably, he's the best in the business in my eyes. Scott's always got great stuff. So if you want to find more of me, you can follow me on Twitter at mtorresports, that name right there on your screen, mtorresports. And if you're watching here live on YouTube, do me a favor, take a second out of your day, like the video and subscribe to the channel at Oregon Football. Max Torres is where you can find me on YouTube. And then make sure to check out our written content over on ducksdigest.com, and share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, family, and other Duck fans. That'll do it for myself, Max Torres. That's Mark Wang. Thank you guys so much for listening, watching, and supporting, and we will catch you guys in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.